Welcome to the Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese. Selection Sunday now in the rearview mirror, which means we have our hands on the official 68 team bracket to agonize over these matchups in the coming days. As for the teams, what qualifies as success? I mean, it differs from the big programs to the smaller ones. Those smaller schools can put their schools on the map as UMBC, St. Peter's, Florida Gulf Coast have done in years past, simply by winning a single game or getting to the second weekend. But there's a lot of teams at the top of the bracket, those 1 and 2 seeds, that if they don't make it to San Antonio, if they don't cut down the nets, it won't be a successful March. It can also be a successful March for us gamblers if we can hit it big in some of these pools. And this episode is for you. This is our annual March Madness pool strategy episode. We're going to break down the two most popular pools that people are playing out there in the market, which of course are those traditional bracket pools as well as survivor pools. And we're going to bring in pool play expert and friend of the podcast, Jason Lisk from poolgenius.com to help us unpack all of it. How excited are you for March Madness to officially kick off on Tuesday night, Jason?
Super excited. Definitely to watch these games. Also, that I don't have to make these bracket predictions about, which of these crazy bubble teams is going to get excluded, which is what I was doing up till now. And all the prep work that I've been doing, hopefully, will come to fruition as we get into these games. I've been studying all these teams, making notes, and we've been adjusting our ratings for our bracket pick advice. So we have detailed information on all the teams.
We here at Action Network love Pool Genius. We love their products, and we've once again partnered with them this season. That's because they remain the only site dedicated exclusively to helping people win more pools across all kinds of sports, from the NFL to college basketball and everything in between. We love data and analytics here at Action, and they've spent over a decade building tools to optimize your picks based on math, game theory, and data. And their subscribers have reported more than $8 million in pool prize winnings since 2017, and cash in their pools more than 3 times more than expected. So much value, so much to unpack here in this episode. So let's jump right into it. But before we do, Jason, why don't you just quickly tell us about the customizable products that Pool Genius offers this year?
Yeah, for the NCAA tournament specifically, we have a variety of things, including some new one more new product. Our core product is our men's bracket product, which has been going on for well over a decade, and you get customized pick advice for all types of scoring rules, set up as many pools as you want, and you get a set of brackets so you can set up an upset driven pool, a small pool, all that stuff, and you might get different upsets. You might get chalkier picks in the small pool. You might get some key picks in other pools. And we give you alternate brackets so you can view all the alternates and decide which ones you want to play if you're playing a portfolio. Besides the bracket picks, we have our Survivor. We have a Calcutta product. So we have a Survivor product that will give you the odds, the round advancement odds, kind of assess, both teams' current win odds and their future value, because that's what you really have to do in Survivor is figure out when you want to use a team, when it makes the most sense to take your risk. You either take risk now or you take it later by trying to hope a team doesn't kill you in the final four. And so that's Survivor. In Calcutta, we have a customized product where you get our advancement odds and our numbers applied to whatever you say your Calcutta rules are. And you can and it adjust as your pool size, as your pot size increases, as you enter how much money a team was bid for. So it is designed to help you as you go through a Calcutta pool. And then new for this year, women's NCAA brackets. Same logic, same philosophy as our men's brackets, but we now have picks on South Carolina, Connecticut, USC, etc. in the women's brackets. So if you're playing women's brackets, check us out.
Again, today we'll be discussing the strategies for the two most popular kinds of March Madness pools. That means our traditional bracket pools as well as survivor pools. We'll start with the more popular bracket pools. That's what the vast majority of people are comfortable and familiar with. And we'll move to some of the other pools and kind of look at some of the angles that are specific and unique to them. As a reminder, Pool Genius is extending special discounts just for Action listeners. They've got options for March Madness, NFL pools, golf pools, really whatever you're into. So if you want to get an edge in your bracket pool or survivor pool this week, just visit the link in this episode's description to see all the offers and discounts. All right, let's get into the meat of this. This is what people came for. This is what they're listening in for. Jason, from a data perspective, what are the most important components to consider when filling out your traditional bracket? And what are the rules to be aware of? Scale of buy-in, number of entries that you're competing against.
Yeah, we definitely want to adjust on pool size, and not just pool size, but functional pool size. like the number of payout spots. So we would treat a 100-person winner take all pool differently than we would treat one with 10 payout spots. And we want to take a little more risk in the winner take all because you are less likely to the outcome and you need to thread the needle more. And so those things will come into play. And then of course the scoring rules matter a lot. Like um, the standard scoring, like if you go to ESPN or a place that has like a really large amount for the champ pick, puts an extreme bonus on getting the champ, the final four, the champion, runner up. And so you really want to think what team's giving my best chance. And maybe I'm willing to eat some chalk there and differentiate elsewhere so I give myself the best chance to hit those points. Whereas in a seed-based pool or an upset pool, maybe I'm going on some upsets, some less likely outcomes there just to maximize my points. And so you want to think about all those things, and they all come up in our strategy as we think about what's the best way to play it.
Now, this year in particular, here in 2025, you talk about chalky picks potentially getting to the Final Four, winning the national championship. At least according to Ken Palm, any of the top seeds, the number one seed, so that's Florida, Houston, Auburn, Duke, if any of them win the national title, there's a high likelihood they're going to be the top rated in terms of their net rating from Ken Palm as an overall rating of any champion in the last 25 years, making this the most incredible crop of one seeds that we've seen really in the last quarter century. Do you think it is worth it to play contrarian and go outside of those number one seeds, or are they just so much stronger than the field that you don't want to handicap yourself right out of the gate by getting a little too cute and going with a 3 or 4 seed to cut down the nets?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you kind of my assessment of this field and along those lines with our ratings. We Duke is rated higher than any team we've had in the last decade. Now that's compared to the average Division One school, and you have to understand things have changed. Like the older players, the transfer portal, mid majors being basically ripped of their players, and them playing now, Janai Broom and guys like that on high majors. Those guys would have been on the 10 seeds and making a run a decade ago. And so the average college basketball team is probably not quite as good as it was in 15 because some of the mid majors have lost those. But relative to average, Duke is really dominant. So is Houston. Florida's on a roll, and probably since Thanksgiving would rate similarly closer to Duke. Auburn, really good early, sliding late, but still up there. And so just to put it in perspective, 2023, that was the Alabama year with Brandon Williams, yeah, and they were the one seed, but he was hurt, and their power rating is less than Tennessee this year, who's not even a one seed, relatively speaking. And he was hurt. And so we know that all the one seeds got knocked off that year, but they also weren't as dominant as this year's teams. And so if you're asking me, I think I would say one of these teams is going to win the national title. I would be very surprised. Now, could there be one of them get knocked off in like the Sweet 16 or something? Yeah. The eight seeds are strong. Could a Gonzaga or a Connecticut with their pedigree and when with a fully healthy team entering the tournament beat them? Yes. There are roadblocks, but I think one of them will get through. And if that path opens up because the other got knocked off, that just makes that team's chances more likely. And so I wouldn't go too far down the list this year. It's kind of like my thought. The other thought here is I think the committee got the top 3 or 4 seed lines right in terms of quality. But then it's a jumbled mess after that. And so I'm not, I think it's like there's a lot of like question marks in the middle of this bracket.
It's interesting when you talk about the top. I also look at the bottom, the 12 through 16 seeds. This was a very light year on what are called bid stealers. You didn't have these Cinderella stories in conference tournaments where a team goes 17 and 15 and then wins 5 games in 5 days. Now, part of that is a lot of these low and mid-major conferences have constructed their tournaments to really
Yeah.
protect top seeds, advancing them all the way to the semis or having every single game on their home floor. But with that being said, between the 12 and 16 lines, there are 11 teams that were either co or regular season champs that went on to win their conference tournament as well. So, from that perspective, do you think there's a chance for some madness and an opportunity to really get crazy with some upset picks to differentiate your bracket right out of the gate with those round of 64 upsets?
There are definitely, I would I play that in like a small bracket? No. Would I probably bet that more as like the money line type plays? But there are definitely opportunities where these 12 seeds, I mean, Colorado State's favored, and they should be, by the way, should be. We were giving them out for the Mountain West futures. We have them rated up. Their lineup is vastly different than it was in November and December. And with this current lineup, they're playing like a top four seed. That's the quality. Now we haven't seen it outside the Mountain West, and so you got question marks. But Colorado State has potential to be that, and they're a 12 seed. Liberty, Yale, who else is up in that group? We got McNeese. We got UC
UC
San
San Diego.
Diego,
Yeah.
who honestly, I thought had an at-large case if they had lost to UC Irvine and should have got in over, say, a North Carolina or one of these other teams in the bubble and been like an 11 seed, 10 seed, and they are a 12. And they draw the Big Ten champ coming off a long week and going out to Denver in the elevation. So there's lots of potential in that 12-13 range because, yes, as you said, the seeds held this year. Um, I was doing bracket projections 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I barely had to change anything in the top two or three seed lines of the mid majors. Now they did change in the 16 seed range, but at the 12, 13, 14, a lot of those teams won. And the teams that maybe weren't quite expected to win, like a Troy, is emerging and still playing well and has athletes that can play well. And so I think there is a lot of danger in that 12 to 14 range.
Before we transition and talk about survivor pools, which is a little bit more advanced and maybe a little bit more unique to the casual bettor, what advice do you give to folks that are just parachuting in? This is their one touch point with college basketball the entire season. They haven't been keeping an eye on it or really keeping track of anything, either from a strategy perspective or these are just some nuggets to know that'll make you feel a little bit more plugged in to the big dance.
I mean, just if you're not used to playing and you're bouncing in, I would say avoid picking too many upsets in your bracket, especially if you're playing in a group of friends in a small pool. Um, individual upsets are hard to pick. Like nobody saw NC State coming. NC State making the Final Four last year did not kill you. You had to have Connecticut as champ, but nobody had NC State, probably. I mean, in 300, 400 person pools, nobody had them. The picks that kill you are the like popular teams you fade. Like if you're like I'm gonna fade Auburn, and if Auburn wins the title, you're dead. That's the picks that kill you. And so I would say, you got to get that Final Four right. You got to get the right combination of the one and two seeds. But there's so many combinations. I think you can be chalky and just pick the right combinations of one, two, three seeds this year and do well. So don't get too crazy at the top in the final rounds of your bracket. The other thing is, like I said, top of the bracket's pretty strong compared to recent history. Um, will that hold? I think there's some injury question marks in like the three seed range that could cause some issues, but at the top, I have a hard time seeing a lot of these teams losing. So I think you just focus in on the chalk and look at some popularity numbers. We have that to differentiate some of them, but you don't have to get too crazy in a bracket pool. You can win a bracket contest going 1v1 in the final because a lot of people don't like to do that. They like to pick one seed and then one flyer. You can just, you know, Connecticut Purdue last year wasn't that popular of a combo. It won you pools and it was sitting right there. So anyway, those are my general advice for this year. Like, I don't think you should shy away from Duke, Florida, Florida, Duke, Duke, Auburn, Florida, Houston. Just have the right combo.
Yeah, I agree with the top teams. One of the issues that I have year over year is that there's certain teams, and we've seen it with Nate Oates' Alabama squads. If the three-pointers aren't falling, they could lose to just about anybody. If they're making 12 to 15 threes, they could win the national championship. That's what I would refer to as a high variance team just based on their three-point volume and their accuracy, which sometimes in neutral sites, we've seen it with NCAA tournament games as well, where they use different basketballs, and all of a sudden teams are shooting 15% from three. If that's their only path forward, sometimes that can scare me away a little bit. You look at the top teams, at least on the one line, all of these teams can win with their defense. So even if the shots aren't falling in the first weekend, they can certainly, just grind out some wins in the half court. So just something to consider if a team, whether it's one of the top seeded teams or you're looking at a Cinderella, are they dependent on one thing, turnover margin, 3 points, getting to the foul line a ton, things that if it's taken away, all of a sudden they become a pedestrian team.
Yeah,
Are
that's a
we
great point on that. I mean, the Alabama had that run last year, and they were very offensively skewed, as you said, relying on that. But we've seen teams like that falter. I think if you are strong in areas like rebounding, you aren't relying on outside shooting. Then when it happens, then you're just getting a bonus in the tournament. And so I do think you want to think about that. I think some of the higher variance teams in this year's tournament are also these injury situations like Texas Tech, Iowa State, the three line. Those teams could flame out early because of the injuries, or they could go on a run. And so that also increases the variance. Illinois, just because they've been so up and down with their lineup, they've played like a one seed at times and played like they shouldn't be in the tournament at other times. It seems like that are high variance. And then yeah, a lot of these mid majors shoot the ball a lot, and so that it does increase variance in these early round games.
Let's transition to my favorite style of March Madness pool, which is the Survivor pool. It's pretty simple. Whether you have to pick two winners on Thursday, Friday, or just one winner every single day, it's one and done, meaning you can use that team to survive, but you cannot use them again, which means there's two separate ways that you can get booted. You can either lose, and, unfortunately, in that situation, you're done from the pool, or you have to buy back, and there's some prohibitive costs and also strategy to consider. Or, which happens to me many times, I just run out of teams. All
Yeah.
the teams that are left, I've already used all of them, and you get eliminated in that way. So, kind of walk us through what it's like to strategize these and how people should think of them in terms of approaching it as opposed, like just from a big picture perspective, coming in, perhaps doing it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is absolutely right. Like you could run out of teams, and there's also risk. There's risk. There's two types of risks in Survivor Pool. There's the risk I lose right now, and there's the risk this team burns me because they just keep going on a run. And it's not always the teams you think either, right? Florida Atlantic, people loaded up on Florida Atlantic because they caught um, Fairleigh Dickinson couple two what 2 in the 8 or 9 versus 16 game, loaded up on them in the second round. Then they reached the final four. Those people probably lost picking against them in the Elite Eight, and so. It's not always the teams you think that you want to fade that end up costing you, but that's how it works. I mean, so you just got to make the decisions based on the information you have going into that game, and you got to assess both types of risks. What are the odds this team's still around in the Final Four based on where we are now, and could win the national title? So I need them for that final pick. Versus what are the odds they win now or get eliminated? And you balance both because, like, let's take Duke in round one this year. Duke is according to our like 50% to make the Final Four. I think in the betting markets you might be at a minus number. And so they've got a lot of you use them now, you risk being burned, like 50 a coin flip. But they're a lock to win in round one, virtually. Um, Baylor or Mississippi State are a toss-up game. So they're like 50% win now, but they're not going to burn you. It's two sides of the same coin. I think both are picks that are not the best pick you could make, but they are similar picks on different sides of that coin. Like you're just shifting where your risk is entirely. So I think the picks you want to focus on are the ones that give you a good chance to advance, but you think that team's odds of going deep are less than maybe other people think, or maybe they're a 3 seed that has a great matchup right away, but then it gets tough by the Sweet 16. And so you're like, I think I can use them now. And so you want to try to identify things. Or you find the 7-10 matchup where you're like, I think I'm getting good odds now. I think this team's 65, 70% to win, and I want to take them.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point about trying not to get too far ahead of yourself in terms of what the hypothetical matchups could be, because you can get burned and crazy things happen and there's upsets, and all of a sudden you could have a huge favorite in the Sweet 16 that you thought was going to run into a higher seed and be an underdog, and that all of a sudden becomes a layup. When I start to look at this particular year, though, I look at Houston and I look at Auburn, and to a lesser degree, I look at Florida, where yes, it's basically a free square to get them against a 16 seed. They're not going to lose those games. And then the committee did them no favors whatsoever. Having the Zags in the second round against a Houston team that may be shorthanded, Florida potentially having to play UConn, and then Auburn having to play against Louisville. These are tough matchups that I would almost rather
They're
play in the Sweet 16 as opposed to the round of 32.
There for sure. I don't think you're picking those games in the Sweet 16. It's just a question whether you want to save them in case they go to the Final Four or in the Elite Eight round. Um, I think I probably still lean more to save, but if I'm playing like a portfolio of entries, which I think you should do, like if I'm playing this contest, I'm finding my price point and then dividing entries up. I don't want to play one entry, I want to play like 10. I want to cover combos. I want to have like some where I pick Tennessee right away, but some where I have Tennessee available and just see what works. is kind of how I would play it. And so yeah, I wouldn't rule out using any team. I would probably employ like a combined approach where I'm like sprinkling some types of teams early and saving them on the other entries.
Now, I think the casual gambler, even if they can get their own strategy fine-tuned, calibrated, they feel confident about the teams that they're putting forward and hoping to catch, certain matchups in, the first weekends on Saturday and Sunday. All that's great. But if you don't understand how long the average player is in and alive in a pool like this, you don't necessarily have a feel for when you should get aggressive, when you should try to save teams. How long is the average entry in a survivor pool?
Not very long. If you make it with an entry to the Sweet 16, you're above the game probably, especially if you had to make multiple picks. Now, unless you're using all your one seeds, and then you're in trouble longer term probably. So if you're playing the game at all to like try to set yourself up to win a big pool, but in the Final Four, you're taking on risk, and your odds are probably under 50% to make the Sweet 16. Um, but that's how it's played. Now, when do you want to set up scenarios? I don't think you worry about popularity as much in the first round. There's enough options, people are spread out, but you will find like whatever 14 seed wins, if one happens, or 13 seed, people will play against them heavily in the next round with like the 5 seed, the 6 seed, the seven. And then you've got to decide, do I want to fade the crowd? Because if it happens, Missouri, my Missouri Tigers lost to Princeton a couple years ago, the 15 seed, and everybody was on them in survivor pools. And if you avoid that team, boom, you are suddenly in a pool that got wiped out. And so those are the strategies you got to think about. Do I want to save future value, or do I want to play the crowd? And that starts up in like the second round and definitely the Sweet 16. And then you have to be comfortable taking an underdog at some point. I guarantee you, you almost will have to take an underdog at some point to win a March Madness Survivor Pool.
As our illustrious producer Matt Mitchell likes to say, I'm Mikey Hedges from time to time. I have no problem if I make it to the Sweet 16 or Elite Eight and there's a Cinderella that's making a run. If I'm fading them, hey, sprinkle on the money line the other way, maybe even just to cover your costs. There's different ways to hedge out beyond just having multiple entries in some of these pools. So just something to consider for people who are getting into this for the first time. Any other thoughts on survivor pool play and some strategy that you just try to give, people who are participating at the first time? I think we hit a lot of the main buckets here, but in terms of let's bring it to 2025.
Yeah.
We talked about the strength of the top, those three seeds a little bit weaker, Gilbert being out for the season and this tournament certainly for Iowa State, Texas Tech having a huge variance in terms of lineup, not only players being healthy and available, but also playing at the level they did when they were a top 10 team across all the analytical platforms about a month ago. So when you think about let's start with Thursday, Friday, where does your mind go? Let's just talk about your picks and not necessarily even the overarching strategy of survivor pool play.
Yeah, my mind goes to finding those 3 seeds, the 4 seed. Well, I think the 5 seeds are a little too risky in some of them that I'm playing, but there are some 6 and 7s that I'm willing to play on future value, like maybe a Kansas to win one game, right? Maybe a Gonzaga, because then I'm playing that they won't beat Houston, but they're a favorite in this round, right? Um, or I'm looking at the 3 seeds. Maybe they have some risk, but I'm willing to take on that risk because I think that risk also makes it unlikely they make a deep run. So maybe you're just like, I'm going to take a risk on Kentucky that they can beat a 14 seed, and maybe the injuries just keep them from making a deep run in this tournament. And so those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about balancing. And then the other thing I would say we haven't talked about, but one, I'll cover this in the article for subscribers, but you have to think about the combinations of teams used, because some teams play on Thursday, Saturday in week one, and then we'll play teams in the same region that played on a different day in the first week, depending on the East, the West, Midwest. And so you can't use teams that don't complement each other. You might otherwise get in a situation where if those teams advance, you find yourself with a region where you've used 3 teams, and that's not good. And so you do have to think about how you balance your first round picks across days, and then how you're setting up not using too many teams from the same region for the next week.
Say I'm in a pool with you. It's a smaller size pool. Our picks are locked in. You ask me, who do you got today? And I say Colorado State over Memphis is my survivor pick, or Drake over Mizzou, or UC San Diego over Michigan. Am I too cute by half, or do you kind of view that as a heady move, maybe a plus EV move if I can just make it through that first risky pick? Like, what is your gut reaction when someone shares something like that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Colorado State's favored, so I don't think
Right.
that's
Yeah.
too cute because I do think they're the more likely team to win. I do think it with these underdogs, like I said, you're not going to have such a popularity. Like if I'm playing a dog, I want to get the crowd against me. I want to leverage that on upset. So I'm not sure I want to do that in round one on an outright dog. But I'm willing to do it after round one if I think the popularity dictates it. If I can catch 20% or more of the pool on the team I'm picking against, I love that on an underdog, right? I don't think that's going to happen with some of these first round plays.
Last one to get you out of here on which first round matchup do you think is going to be the gravedigger, just sending people out of survivor pools right away? I'll throw out a couple. I don't think Michigan is going to be a popular pick because I believe they're going to be playing their fourth game in less than a week at altitude in Denver against a San Diego team that leads the nation in turnover margin. They actually have the second best turnover
Yes.
margin in the last 8 years of college hoops. So that helps them offset the fact that they don't get anything on the offensive glass. So the Tritons absolutely could send Michigan home. But in that same pod, Yale did this last year. They upset Auburn, and now they're drawing an A&M team that's outside of the top 300 in three-point percentage accuracy. If the threes are not falling, yes, A&M's going to grab 15 to 20 offensive rebounds in this game. But I think Yale could be one of those teams to play spoiler. So just looking at that region, I'm already a little bit worried for any survivor picks that are going with the favorites.
Yeah. Oh, I think what, yes, the survivor pools, it'll come down to how many of these four and fives lose as to how big the first round wipeout is. I think you're going to have most people on those teams. And like you said, the risk is definitely there. Not only what you cited, UC San Diego's turnovers. Don't look at Michigan's turnover rate on offense either. If you
Brutal.
and so you're like, which Michigan team's going to show up? The one that played really well for 3 days, or the one that went like 2-13 against the spread and was fading for 2 months straight in the Big Ten regular season? And so I think there's definite risk there.
Last question for you. In terms of if you have a feel for overall size of the pool you're in, let's call it 200 or 500 or 1,000, do you have any ratio that you like to stay tethered to where it's, if there's 1,000 entries, I'd like to have five entries. If there's only 100, I'm fine with having one or two. Or do you kind of just play it, by ear each time that you get invited?
I mean, obviously, your own budget's going to be the biggest factor of how much you want to play, right? But I think as long as you're not playing, like in a large one, I probably don't want to be more than 1%, and I probably won't get to that in a super large one, right? You're not going to get that high. In a small one, I probably don't even want to be more than 5%. So in like a 20 entry, I don't want to have multiple entries because I want to have other people paying into the pot. Maybe if it's 50, I'll have two. 100, I'll have 3 to 5, right? And those are kind of like the upper end of where I think you start to lose EV by paying yourself and taking too many scenarios.
Our thanks again to Jason Lisk. As a reminder, Pool Genius is extending special discounts just for Action listeners. They've got options for March Madness, NFL pools, golf pools, really whatever you're into. So if you want to get an edge in your bracket pool or survivor pool this week, just visit the link in this episode's description to see all the offers and discounts. We'll return here on the Action Network podcast with some more March Madness player prop episodes. Last year, Dr. Nick was just scorching hot. I think he hit 80% at one point, so you want to make sure to tune in for that. But for our primary March Madness betting coverage, including our exhaustive first round betting previews, be sure to check out Stuckey, myself, the three-man weave, and our whole team over on the Big Bets on Campus podcast. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you right here next time on the Action Network podcast.